if we're already here, my name is Jordan Becker. I live in the Saratoga area. I studied ceramics in college. I went to Bennington College, and when I finished my degree, I worked at a studio called Greenwich House Pottery, which is in New York City. And there I met a gentleman named Dan Greenfeld. Okay, and many of you guys know Dan Greenfeld. He built a fabulous wood kiln right down the road. We became friends pretty quickly. He asked me if I wanted to come up and help build the kiln from New York City, and I did. And that was my connection to this area, and that was about 20 years ago. So I have... Firstly, I want to say I'm super inspired by everybody's information that's coming out. I feel like this is all coming together really lovely, and I really want to go home and make some work because I'm very inspired. But nonetheless, I'm going to give you a quick talk here. So there's 3 parts to the talk. There's a quick history of kilns. There's some information about my work, and then we'll get into my study of kilns. Basically, I'm a pyromaniac, okay? I like to control fire. I like to build boxes that fire is in. And so I call myself a potter, but also that instrument, designing different kilns to do different things is something I'm as passionate about as I am about making pottery or making ceramic sculpture. So this project is great. So quick history. Globally speaking, the first fired wares were fired in holes dug in the ground, hand-built pieces, pit-fired. They were not used to hold water generally. This happened in the East. This happened in the West. It was a global kind of kiln style. This piece specifically is from the Seneca Nation, so trying to keep it local, right? This was something that probably was made in the area from mined clay, a Native American coil built, fired in a pit similar to this. So China, England, United States, everywhere this was the beginnings of firing pottery. As people thought about it more, wanting to get more temperatures, this is Western style kilns. So we're talking like Roman inspired kilns where the fire was separated from the wares. So we had a space for stoking separate from the wares. And also notice the tops. The kiln started to become closed. This is probably similar to what would have been in our area here, okay? That the Abraham Hudson, they talk about the kiln, right, would probably have been similar style to this. Great example of a kiln that would have been the next stage after this. Again, this is Western. So we're talking about the Americas. We're talking about Europe. This is Grecian. Sorry, went back a slide here. So this is a kiln from the mid-1800s in England, right? So it's not in this country, but it's one of the few still standing. And I would assume that this would be a similar looking kiln to what would have been here. And this is kind of a drawing of how that works. The ware would be stacked on the inside of this kiln, and the fire boxes would be below. The flame would come up, and the whole kiln would act like a chimney, called like a bottle kiln. This kiln is in Sturbridge Village, Massachusetts. I don't know if any of you guys have been there. I grew up not too far from this kiln. Again, this was based off of a mid-1800s potter in Connecticut. So again, kind of in our area, possibly what that kiln here would have looked like. But this is obviously a lot bigger. Their scale is a lot greater. All right, this was kind of interesting. This is called the Scove Kiln. So much pottery, so much clay making was for bricks at the time, to build homes, to build all sorts of different, as industry was increasing. So basically a Scove Kiln was stacks of bricks set up in a way that a fire could be built underneath. And basically you're building the kiln as you were with the bricks that you were firing. So obviously the outside layer would not have gotten hot enough. The insides would have gotten plenty hot enough. The outside bricks would have gone into the next Scove Kiln. And I'm pretty sure in my limited research that this type of kiln would have been set up as a temporary kiln, and people would have moved from place to place, mining the clay, building the kilns, selling the bricks, going to another spot, mining the clay, building the kiln, selling the bricks. Because there was a need. There was a huge need of bricks in the mid-1800s. Okay, quickly. My love of kilns came from studying Eastern kilns, okay? So this is a Japanese bank kiln, actually digging a tunnel into a mountain of clay, hollowing it out, firing, hollowing it out, firing, hollowing it out, firing, and then up for your flue, and then using the mountain as insulation. Not something that was done in this country, not something that was done in the West. The West. I had an amazing opportunity to go to China 10 years ago. I'm not really looking at my notes here. So these are traditional dragon kilns that I saw, or the remnants of them. I think the most important thing, for the sake of time, about this is the shard piles. Like, I could just not get over the shards that were around these kilns. And it just kind of spoke to how the clay wasn't actually that valuable, right? It was more like that they had gone through that many pieces around these kilns, and it was just discarded to the side. And that scale of that, to me, was mind-blowing. Okay, so my next part is about my explorations of kilns. So first kiln that I ever built, right out of college, 55-gallon drum, sawdust, pile of sand. Just kind of fun. I think I was 20 years old when I built this one. 2008, this kiln is in Salem, New York. This is the kiln I primarily fired most of my work in. It's a wood-burning kiln. 5 days to fire. I'm going to kind of go through this kind of quick here for the sake of time. This is loading that kiln. Again, this is inspired by the Chinese dragon kiln. One thing I wanted to note here is that everything is raised up by these little balls of clay, which is called wadding. And that's a mixture of fire clay and sawdust. And what that allows everything to do is be lifted up off the shelves, be lifted up off each other. It does not melt that clay. And using that type of clay to make the wadding kind of led me to what I would like to propose as a clay that we build for this project. Just to give you an idea of scale of the amount of work that's in that kiln. Okay, then into my work a little bit. So I had, you can see why I absolutely love Don's talk. Because I feel like as humans, we are incredibly disconnected to the earth. And the toilet paper reference was amazing, right? And to give you that idea of that scale. So my work is interested in capturing that moment when that ice dam releases. right? And can you imagine just being there and like all of that water all of a sudden lets go and all of that happens and you're just standing there thinking of, observing that moment, right? And so my pieces are hopefully an imaginary moment when that might have happened. So a lot of references for that would be, glacial, the places where the water gathers, tides, erosion. So I was at the edge of my seat with Donnie's talk because I'm so inspired by that stuff. So again, same, right? The moment that the dam breaks, right? Flowing through. The sediments, the different particles moving across our earth, right? So to achieve this, firing the types of kilns that I do fire, it's organic, it's natural. It's not something that can be created by hand. It's something that takes the elements, it takes the heat to create it. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about accessibility in ceramics. I feel like ceramics has gone to the point where you buy clay, they tell you what to fire it to, you make something, you stick it in a kiln that you have no idea how it was built, but it's plugged into a wall, and you walk away and you have this beautiful piece, right? But there's so much in those steps that you could learn and be inspired by. So I started this program where I allowed ceramic artists to build kilns using a set amount of bricks. So they showed up to a site, they had a design, and they could build any type of kiln that they wanted to. And again, that was just like about accessibility, to understand fire, to understand how to make something hot, to understand how a flame would move through a kiln. Here's one of my favorite participants. And she had built and designed a kiln with 2 fireboxes on each side with a chimney in the center. So there's just more pictures and imagery of the kilns that were built during this workshop. Specifically, a long one here, you can see imagery of pre-firing and then after firing. We would disassemble the kilns and leave the work as one unit so that we could see how this looks in relation to this. Oh, yay. So my Father's Day tradition started about 5 years ago. And this is where I wanted to reference the wadding. So I had surpluses of wadding from my kiln. So I said, well, could I just build a kiln with that wadding, right? Could I make these little miniature wood kilns out of that clay and fire them like they were from a bank in Japan or China? And so I did that. And that led to the idea of constructing kilns out of raw clay, basically. Instead of making bricks or stacking bricks, the idea that you could make an arch form and then, like you're coil building a pot, set that arch on the top of the form, pull out the form, coil build a chimney, right? Why not? So I started working with high school kids and developed the idea that we could increase that scale from this size a little bit bigger, make an arch form, have them pack the clay. And I started to try to understand how to build a clay body that you could have a fire raging in here while it be maybe a few hundred degrees up here, right? And it would be able to withstand that type of thermal shock, thermal difference. So my last slide here. So this kind of goes along with the lovely studies that were done on the table there. Not this drawing, but this was from a festival where I was allowing people to come and build kilns with these bricks. And we all used this sand on the bottom of the kiln to level the ground. But this team decided that they were going to use the sand as the actual base, interior of the kiln, right? So you can see what happened was that sand fluxed or melted out and became a total pool of glass. And everything was stuck in. And this process, like what we're doing, is not about the cups, the bowls, the sculptures. It's about the process, right? It's about learning materials. No one cared, obviously, about this. And I just wanted to just show you that in doing this, we have to understand materials and melting points of different clays. So this is kind of what I came up with as a design for our kiln, which would be built out of the clay that we mined. We would add sawdust to it to get it closer to that wadding recipe. There'd be an arch that would move, or a tube that would move all the way through the kiln, a cylindrical form that would be built up. The ware would be stacked in this space, and fires would come from both sides. Now, so you'll remember, like the second slide, there was a kiln without this on it here, right? It was just a firebox on this side and then a cylinder. Being that I like to innovate, try new things, I've assumed that this, in that initial design, this area would have been a lot hotter than this area. So by adding a second firebox, we would be able to have a little more control to get more heat even throughout the cylinder. So we have to do the tests on the clays, find out which clay is most suitable for this. But that's what I'm thinking. This is 65 feet. No, just kidding. No, so I think, but I'm imagining if we took that log right there and turned it on its side, so that would be representational of this cylinder. So that, 3 to 4 feet would be from here to here. We would want to fire 30 of those bird forms that were made in that. That would be about the scale you'd be looking at. But again, it depends on the clay, right? If we test the clay and it doesn't do well under, stress from fire, then we obviously have to make it smaller. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.